My name is Stephanie James Harris. I am the Executive Director of the New Jersey Amistad Commission from the New Jersey Department of Education. Welcome and thank you on behalf of the Commission, from the Department of Education in New Jersey, on behalf of the New York Department of Education, and on behalf of Focus Features and our community partners this evening as well, the United Nations Educational Outreach Office, for coming. We really appreciate you spending this evening with us. We were delighted to be able to bring you this screening, this educator screening of the movie Race. As you can see, it definitely takes us on a journey into the life and history. Thank you. Can you hear me better? Not really. Not on either.
It is on. A little bit.
Can you hear me though from it?
Yes.
It really takes you on a journey in regards of the history and the life and the legacies of Jesse Owens, and I'm delighted that we're able to really be able to sort of bring it to the big screen, and that there will be a whole generation of students that will really be able to appreciate his story. We have a couple of presentations we'd like to do, and we also have one of the screenwriters from the movie that's here that you will be able to ask any questions to in regards of how he sort of decided to postulate the story and how it sort of came about. But before I do that, and my hair, if you don't mind, I'm gonna ask you if you bring greetings on behalf of the United Nations. This is Mahir Nasir, the Director of Educational Outreach for the United Nations. And we're delighted that you were able to share this evening with us and to bring your constituents as well. So it's kind of in and out.
Thank you, Stephanie. About a year ago, we cooperated also on a screening in this very same theater when we worked with the Amistad Commission on the screening of Selma. Another great movie that showcased a period in history where people, African Americans, but also supportive white, fought for civil rights and didn't rest until they achieved what they wanted. This was a personal story, but again, it tells of two eras. One that preceded the creation of the United Nations, Nazi Germany, laws that discriminated and eventually led to great horrors in Europe, the Second World War, which led to the creation of the United Nations. So at the United Nations, we use opportunities and we use films as a means of also teaching younger generations the lessons from the past, the terrible history of humanity that still until today we witness injustice, we witness discrimination, we witness racial, and at some point one member was practicing apartheid, but I think luckily that changed. But that all comes, and I think this is the relevance to the program that we run, on the transatlantic slave trade and its legacy. Racism that we see and we saw in the film, and it still manifests itself in many places today, is the legacy of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. Bigotry, concern, and fear from the other still plagues the world. Today, when we watch television and we see the news, we hear about the refugee and migrant problem in Europe. And it's only 1 million people who have now managed to arrive in Europe last year. But look at countries like Lebanon, which is hosting over 1.5 million people. Turkey has 2.5 million refugees. Jordan has 1.5, and so on and so forth. So it's another crisis that has led, unfortunately, we hear politicians or people running for public office saying things that aren't very different from what we heard in that film. I think this is the core of what we need to do, is basically use every opportunity, every film, every story, and everybody who can tell a story, and filmmakers tell great stories, to teach and to use as education tools to teach younger generations at the bottom, at the innermost, we're all the same. When, at the end, when he was going to be honored at a dinner in his honor, and he wasn't allowed to enter into that stage, that spoke volumes. And I think it's these things that really make the story personal to younger people. And I think I would like to congratulate the filmmakers, the screenwriter, the actors, the director, and of course the Amistad Commission and for this great partnership. Thank you. And I look forward, maybe like we did with Selma, to maybe we can screen this also at the United Nations.
So it's always important when young people are inspired by stories of our past. And that is the whole purpose of us that teach social studies and history, that we are able to bring an interconnectedness for young people to be able to understand so that history does not only repeat itself, but there also is a sense of their ability to be able to relate and grow. And so in viewing race, there was a screening that some students at PS 368, Star Academy in Brooklyn, were able to see. And as a result of that, Ben Vielas actually was able to do a musical tribute to Jesse Owens, which he would like to perform for us live now. So I'm going to turn the mic over to Ben.
Okay. What's this?
It's not long.
Jesse Owens, the fastest man alive. He ran for equality and he ran for his life. With each step, he gave racism a slap. With each step, he dominated a lap. He spent a lifetime of training for 10 seconds on the track. He took his chance and never looked back. He grabbed his chance by the hands. He took his place, took his stance, and at the sound of the gunshot, he leaped and he ran without a second thought. Over a second glance, and everyone in the stands, the founded and in the trance, stood up, cheered, and waved their hands. Wow, what a wonderful man. Wow, look how fast he ran. But Hitler looked on with a look of scorn, but his race ended when that finish line tape was torn.
Oh, thank you. First of all, I want to thank Jackie Bezan, Amistad, the Focus Features, the screenwriters for this wonderful film. I am proud to say I am Ben's teacher, and when Ben wrote this beautiful composition, he actually left some out. It's beautiful. It's a wonderful composition, and it was so powerful to me because I saw he really got the life lessons that this movie and the life of Jesse Owens taught. So I am honored to say that's my student, Ben. And thank you very much.
So it's always interesting, I guess, when you watch films to be able sometimes to be able to ask questions about sort of what were the eccentricities, what were the ideas behind it, how did the story sort of make it from idea to film, and how the process went about. So we actually have one of the screenwriters, Joe Shrapnel, that is here with us this evening. That was actually a screenwriter for the film. And so we are going to be able to ask him some questions about how this movie came about, sort of the ideas behind it. How did you decide to sort of frame it? So I guess that would be my initial question for you is, how did you frame the decision as to how this movie would come about and what in the history you would include?
What we would include? Well, I wish I'd had the idea to tell the story of Jesse Owens, but we were approached by the French producer and the director, Stephen Hopkins, my wife and I, and they said, what do you know about Jesse Owens? And I said, I knew a little bit about the 36 games, and I knew that he'd run, and I knew that he'd won, and I knew that he'd won those 4 medals. And we do what we always do, which we got on the internet, and we got on Wikipedia. And I remember, it was like, oh, the Wikipedia page. And I remember, my wife and I write in separate offices. My wife ran down the garden to me and said, we have to do this job. We have to tell this story. This is unbelievable. Because the more you learn about Jesse Owens, the more incredible and actually unbelievable his story becomes. So then it becomes a story of then it becomes exactly your question, which story do you tell? Because it went on. And in the screenplays that I've written, it usually leaps up at you, and what leapt up at us about him was those 3 years between when he first got to Ohio State and went to the Olympics seemed to be the perfect window to tell, because it includes Ann Arbor, where he set these unprecedented, records. He broke 3 and equaled a fourth world record in 45 minutes. And you start there and you go to the Olympics, and we just thought that seemed like a great story to tell. But what happened to Jesse when he came home from the Olympics is a whole other story.
Exactly.
You could tell an entire film about what happened when he came back, because he was abandoned by the AOC, he was abandoned by Avery Brundage, and he was abandoned by his country, frankly. But we wanted to end the film very much on the triumph of his accomplishments at the Games, but also to leave a reminder of what happened to him when he came back, which is where the idea for that last scene came from, and that's based on an anecdote that happened. But that we.
I believe it's a quote that he
Yeah,
actually
that it's a
said.
quote that he had. They didn't even let me into the supper. Yeah, absolutely. And we just thought, well, to me, that stood for that later section of his life when he was overlooked, but he was then belatedly remembered as an American hero. I'm
So,
sorry,
there's a
I should
quote.
have dressed it out here.
There was a quote that they used as the antidote for the last scene. The quote is that Jesse Owens said that Hitler did not snub him, President Roosevelt did.
Yes, when they came back, it's true that they were given a ticker-tape parade for all the athletes. But and the final scene of the film is absolutely based in truth, which was that he was not able to enter the supper, the dinner held in his honor through the front doors of the building. So
Where was that, by the way?
It was actually the Waldorf Astoria here in New York.
It was the Waldorf Astoria here in New York. Yeah.
And I think what becomes very important is that the reality is that regardless of him being Olympic gold, right, 4 medals, all these records, the reality of who he is, and I think you spoke to that juxtapositioned in the story back and forth. He still is an African American and returns to Jim Crow America in
Yeah.
1936.
That wasn't going to change for another 30, 40 years.
And a
Yeah.
college graduate.
And a college graduate
Yeah.
from Ohio State, correct.
So it seemed, this is a very long answer to a short question, which is,
Okay.
how did you choose? For me, those 3 years were the 3 years to tell, because they told the whole story of Jesse Owens in the most exciting and dramatic way, leading up to the Games. So that was a decision we made early on how to do it. Yeah.
So I'll ask another question, and I will, if there's any questions from the audience. You have a room for educators.
Yes.
When you thought about, or did you think about how this could be utilized in a classroom? When you were writing or when you sort of put it together? Because I think this is one of those stories, he's one of those iconic figures that will be reintroduced. He's in a lot of the read-alouds that children read.
Yeah.
He's a story, he's one of the heroes that become a part of the canon for social studies education. But this will allow it to be extended in a great way in regards of educational resources.
Oh, that's
What did you feel like you'd be able to speak to educators, and what would you want them to do with this movie?
I'm thrilled that it's been that you feel that it's useful in that way. It's not something I think about when I'm writing something. Is what goodwill is to I have to be very selfish about. Is this a story I want to tell and I want to see? And I'm thrilled that you feel this is and maybe you don't, but I hope you feel that it's an honest and a good version of Jesse's story, of this iconic American story. Did you enjoy it? Yeah? Great.
So does anybody have any questions for Joe?
I was very excited to hear about the work which has been done in creating the curriculum for the general history of Africa. But I think more of us need to be aware about the availability of this curriculum. 9 chapters in all. The unwritten chapter, and I think this film needs to be central to the unwritten chapter, which is about the diaspora. Thank you.
I was teaching second grade a couple of years ago and used the story of Luce Long and Jesse Owens. It's an interesting story. However, I found out in the process that there was some question about whether Luce actually put that towel down there or not. And so I want you to elaborate on that because I did some research, and Jesse Owens brought that up when he had a talk with Luce Long's son many years later.
Yeah.
And so there were some questions about how true that actually was. And so if you want to elaborate on that.
Jesse remembers that they spoke together before that jump, that he was struggling. He'd blown 2 of the qualifying jumps, and that Lutz came over and spoke to him and said, "Why don't you try jumping from back here?" And that's the way he tells it. Then there are sort of objective historical accounts of that, and there did seem to be some communication between them. The towel going down and jump from here was an anecdote we heard. I cannot remember from which source, but it was one of the stories that crops up. The historian in you says, "Okay, is that true, or is that just they want to be true?" We decided to use it because he had laid down a handkerchief at Ann Arbor, and that is recorded, and we like the echo of that. That this was his idea. He met a sportsman that was his equal, and in the last place he expected to meet it, which was Berlin in '36, and a Nazi. But I think the duty of a screenwriter or a dramatist is to tell the best story, and you're telling a true story, so you have to be honest to. You have to be honest to a version of the truth, but I'm not a historian. So I would say that may not have happened exactly as we portray it in the film, but I believe the spirit of that moment is true. Did you find whether it happened or not?
When he was questioned about it later, he said something to the effect of, or you got the feeling that he was really he said that in a way to, he wanted the son to really feel good about his father, and who he was. Yeah. And so, you got the feeling that he kind of stretched it a little bit.
I think so. That you can travel to the heart of Nazi Germany in 1936 and meet a guy who becomes your buddy. And that's the power of sport
and becomes the
humanity.
Representative for the Aryan nation.
Yeah,
and all of the ideology.
Oh, Lutz was the consummate Nazi.
Did Hitler allow that to be released from Germany, or does that archival footage exist?
You mean
the Olympiad? It's the Olympiad.
The German filmmaker.
The Olympiad is actually a film, and there's actual footage. That was actually a film that she was making, and it was released. It was actually the first time that the Olympics were actually filmed and released like that. So you can, as an educator, you can go and actually find film footage. It's the first time that will actually be able to, so you can show your students themselves what happened at the 36 Olympics.
She made it, Leni Riefenstahl made the film, and as I understand it, the Nazis were not happy with it because it did make a big hero of Jesse, and it was an honest record of what happened at the games. But she had a lot of Nazi credit because she'd made Triumph of the Will, which was a huge sort of propaganda film for the Nazis. So she was considered the leading Nazi filmmaker. She's an interesting character. You could make an entire film about her.
I'm a social studies teacher, and I'm actually doing a Black History Museum on February 29th with my students. One of my kids is researching Jesse Owens. And I couldn't help, and I know this as a historian, the parallels that Germany treated Jews the same way America treated Black people. America has given Jewish people reparations, although the Holocaust didn't happen in America. As representatives here are from the United Nations, I'm hoping that you guys can look at this and say, this would be the cause and the case for America to grant reparations to African Americans. Because when the 2 Jewish runners said, you're going to have hell to pay when you get back home, because the Jewish people were still very powerful in the United States, although they were being oppressed in Europe, in Germany. Jesse Owens still went back and had to use the service entrance. So I'm hoping that today, representatives from the United Nations and everyone from the Amistad Commission will say, not in the form of just a check, but let's repair, let's create training, let's create situations that will help to revive and renew African Americans. We're just on the heels of Beyonce at the Super Bowl and all the boycotting and the racism, the backlash. It proves that that stuff is still going on. She couldn't even show Black Pride and commemorate an organization that was just protecting African Americans from the police. It wasn't a murderous organization. But to understand that America has, its government itself, just like Roosevelt, has conspired against African American progress from that time and before. So I'm just hoping that this film will help to expose that.
The subliminal message gets lost. But what needs to be understood is that Hitler got his ideas for how to treat the Jews. The signs, wearing the Jewish stars, that came out of ideology, racist ideology in America. And we have set the template in this country for that kind of treatment to be perpetuated throughout the world on people of color, and then for it to be turned around as somehow we are paranoid schizophrenic when we talk about it. And I am reminded by Bernie's, the gentleman that's running, I don't know, I'm getting old, I think, Sanders, the way he talked to that young woman in the audience last night, because she was trying to get him to talk about reparations for Black people. And the commentary that he made about, well, Latinos also suffered something, and so did poor whites, that wasn't the point. The point, as this young lady is saying, is that there needs to come a time in this country where somebody is going to stand up and honestly say that what happened to people of African descent through that triangular slave trade was appalling. Nobody has said it. People continue to say how appalling Hitler was. And what I think your film successfully does is to show, on some very remote level, not as much as I would like, but I credit you for trying, how absolutely appalling
I'm a white guy
this
from
country
London. I'm just glad to be involved.
Where 14 million people were forced from Africa into North America, Latin America, Caribbean, is something that comes up between member states, but eventually the United Nations is an organization where government representatives, they discuss and agree on things among themselves. And the issue within each country, I mean, has to be resolved within that country itself. That said, we have this program by which actually we are trying to bring out lessons from that dark period and its legacy, whether it's racism, the same thing about the Holocaust and what happened in Europe. We have programs that basically try to inform the public about that period and maybe help make the change. The theme for this year's observance for the International Day to honor the victims of slavery in the transatlantic slave trade is honoring the heritage and culture of the African diaspora and its African roots.
It's a decade-long initiative.
The decade started in 2014, which is 10 years. That's why this year we chose the theme for this year's observance in that session. At the UN last March, we inaugurated a permanent memorial to honor the victims of slavery in the transatlantic slave trade. And you're all welcome to come and see it. It's actually on the UN Plaza outside. You don't even have to take a guided tour. It's just out there. It's fantastic. We have an exhibit that started actually last week. It's called Africans in India, and it looks at something that not many people know about. There's quite a large community of Africans from East Africa who went to India, some of them as traders, some of them as slaves, some of them as soldiers, or who were hired as soldiers or in different professions, ended up living in parts of India and in Pakistan, and they have gone from being slaves or traders or marginalized community to rulers and people high in the military. And we have that exhibit that shows that the African diaspora is not just in the Americas, it's also in other parts of Asia and now in Europe. And I think the UN needs to work with member states, but I think we cannot just work with governments. So the work on education, with education institutions, the work that you do in schools is as important. I mean, I am not a white guy. I look like white. Am I white? Do I look white? I'm Palestinian. When I go home, when I go to visit my family in Palestine, my wife and children are British. When we cross the bridge into Palestine, I go one way and they go one way because I'm Palestinian.
So it's story. It's the same
So
story.
it's the same. It's still, I still live it.
we need the UN support behind that in some way, shape, or form. Because obviously, we're so far from getting even serious acknowledgement, just like Jesse didn't get acknowledgement, and a commitment to real investment and education and a commitment to reparations in any way, shape, or form. So we need the UN support in that. Thank you.
This story is the kind of story that speaks to that kind of generation in the classroom. And we deal with those kind of issues. There are companion educational materials, I think you guys got them when you came in, that accompany the film. There was expeditionary, thank you, I'm tired. Expeditionary learning opportunities to take your students to go, where they have discounted seats to have these kind of discussions. In the companion materials that accompany the film, and they are downloadable and free for educators. That's the purpose that we have you all here. There is a discussion about eugenics, its history in America, what it means and how it translates to Nazism. There's a discussion about the Great Migration, what it means for Jesse to be at Ohio State, what the reality is. So many things that we, and I've watched this movie a number of times that it's very well done, very well written, but it speaks to you. Like the fact that, did anybody notice where he was staying when he got hurt? Where was he staying? Was he in the dorms? Wasn't allowed at Ohio State. Living in a boarding house. Rooming house.
And Ohio State was considered a sort of a fairly mixed race. I mean,
They at least allowed African American
it wasn't
students.
segregated, but the African American students were not allowed to stay on campus. No.
So those kind of things, when you can see it on film, and it's subtly done, but it's important that it's there. And so the whole point of this is to be able to have these kind of reflections beyond what's on a history textbook, because we all know those stories become very one-dimensional for students. But this is the kind of film that can be used in our classroom repeatedly and be able to bring those kind of stories to light, that kind of discussion to light, that kind of reality to light. To think about the juxtapositions, to look at the realities of how the Jews are treated in Nazi Germany. The fact that he is not able to, that they're staying. The fact that he went to the Olympics in a steerage. Mm-hmm. He went to Olympics in steerage. Came back with 4 gold medals. Where do you think he stayed on his way back? With 4 gold medals in his bag. So these are the kind of things that we do need to understand, especially in an age where we think of our Olympians and our athletes as stars. So I would encourage you, and I know that, our wonderful screenwriter said that, Mr. Shrapnel said that they were not able to chose these 3 years, but I would extend with your students as to sort of the history of Jesse following it. There was some
follow
wonderful...
what happened afterwards.
Yeah.
Because Brundage, who's a beast of a guy, Jesse went home to try and make some money. Larry advised him to go home and make some money, and he refused to go on a free tour that would have taken him up for a year and made him run that Brundage was organizing. So Brundage struck him off the Olympic team because he was a big believer in amateur sports, so that Jesse was not allowed to make money. You either run for free or nothing.
Be a janitor.
Well, be a janitor, yeah, exactly. And so he lost his amateur Olympic status. He couldn't run professionally. He wouldn't do what an athlete these days. If you had talent like Jesse Owens now, you would make out like crazy. Advertising, anything. You'd have shoe brands, you'd have endorsements. And instead, he was running against horses in Cuba to make money, like circus stuff. It's outrageous what happened to him afterwards.
So we have one last
question. And so you
question.
could take your students down there.
I think we should.
There's 4 more movies to make about Jesse Owens. It's extraordinary.
The assets that we have available, the information is on the flyers that you received when you checked in at bazanit.com. So it is a curriculum guide with history as well as 11 interdisciplinary lesson plans that meet NCSS standards. There's a discussion guide that's for you, it's for your students, for them to also share with their family and friends. There is a myriad of video clips from the film, scenes from the film, that you can download and keep or you can project directly from the site onto your smartboard in your classroom to highlight any section of a discussion that you may have. So if you're talking, for instance, about sportsmanship, then you may be able to utilize a clip of Jesse and Lutz Long during that long jump scene in the film. So there's a number of those assets available. There's photographs from the film, and so on. So we encourage you to go and access all that. It is completely free, as I know a number of you are already members of the site, but it is completely free. There is also an expeditionary learning opportunity that Stephanie mentioned, which is for any of you or your schools that are already taking students or planning to take students to go see the film in the theater. You register your event on our site, and for every validated trip, we will provide that school with a complimentary DVD of the film for you to teach future classes. It's something that we did with Selma. It worked exceptionally well. We then later provided every high school in America with a copy of the film. So I encourage you to do that and utilize it as a tool to be able to teach this history year after year.
Vanguards of the Revolution, the Black Panther film is on tonight, Stanley Nelson's work. Secondly, as an educator, independent educator, teaching artist, and consultant, it's distressing to have to deal with situations where the teaching to the test does not allow the generosity of time that you need in some cases to implement this. I find a way to work around it, and it's really a pleasure to be in a room with so many educators. But that teaching to the test, what I would prefer students be aware of is common sense versus common core. But to thank you all for this opportunity. I think it's wonderful to have so many intersections and partnerships on this project, and anything that I can do to move this forward, which is my mission every day in the hallway. So thank you so much.
Take students to go see the film.